Sometimes the things we think are broken are just waiting for the right person to see their worth. At a dusty county fair auction, nobody wanted the starving German shepherd trembling in a rusted cage. Not one hand raised, not one bid called. The auctioneer was ready to haul the dog away when cowboy Luke Danner stood up and offered everything in his pocket, $43. What happened next changed both their lives. The moment Luke opened that cage and extended his hand, the dog placed a paw in his palm, as if they'd been meant to find each other all along. But could this forgotten dog hold the key to healing wounds Luke didn't even know he carried? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning that changed everything started like any other Saturday in West Texas, with Luke Danner waking to the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, and the first pale light seeping through the thin curtains of his rented cabin. He was 57 years old, though most days he felt closer to 70. The work was honest but wearing, and the solitude had a way of settling into a man's bones until he couldn't remember what it felt like to share breakfast with someone or hear laughter echo through a house. Luke had been working at Miller's Ranch for going on 4 years now, ever since Margaret passed. Cancer took her slowly, giving them time to say the things that needed saying, though Luke still found himself searching for words he'd forgotten to speak. The cabin came with the job, a small 2-room structure with a kitchenette, a wood stove, and plumbing that protested every morning. It sat at the eastern edge of the property, a good mile from the main house, which suited Luke just fine. He'd grown accustomed to his own company, or at least that's what he told himself. The ranch work was straightforward. Mend, fences, move. Cattle, check water tanks, fix whatever broke. Luke knew the land better than he knew most people anymore. He could read weather in the color of the dawn sky and tell when a heifer was about to calve by the way she separated from the herd. These were skills earned over a lifetime, passed down from his own father, who'd worked cattle in Montana before the big operations swallowed up the family spreads. In his wallet, tucked behind his driver's license and a faded $20 bill, Luke carried a photograph that he took out only when the loneliness got particularly sharp. It showed his son Daniel at 27, standing proud in his police uniform, one hand resting on the head of his K9 partner, a Belgian Malinois named Ranger. Daniel had joined the force right out of college, drawn to service the way his grandfather had been drawn to the land. He'd excelled in the K9 unit, earning commendations, making his mother beam with pride. Luke had been proud too, though he'd never been good at showing it. Margaret had always been the one who knew how to speak love plainly, while Luke expressed it through actions, fixing Daniel's first car, teaching him to ride, showing up to every graduation and ceremony, even when the words caught in his throat. The photograph was 5 years old now, 5 years since the argument that drove a wedge between father and son. It happened 3 months after Margaret's funeral, when Daniel came to check on Luke and found him drunk at 2 in the afternoon, bourbon bottle on the table, eyes red from crying or drinking, or both. Daniel had tried to talk sense, suggested grief counseling, offered to stay for a while. Luke, raw and defensive, had said things he couldn't take back, called Daniel soft. Said real men didn't need to talk their feelings to death, told him to go back to the city and leave him alone. Daniel had left. He'd also left the police force 6 months later, though Luke only learned that through a mutual friend. They'd spoken maybe twice, since then strained phone calls on holidays that lasted less than 5 minutes. Luke had gotten sober, worked the ranch, built a quiet life from the wreckage. But the distance remained, a canyon he didn't know how to cross. That particular Saturday, Luke had decided to drive into town for the county fair. It wasn't something he normally did. Crowds had never been his preference, but the cabin walls had been closing in, and he figured a few hours among people might do him good. He showered, put on his cleanest jeans and a pressed shirt, settled his worn Stetson on his head, and drove his 20-year-old pickup the 18 miles into Brewster Falls. The fairgrounds sprawled across 10 acres on the north side of town, a mixture of carnival rides, livestock pens, vendor stalls, and exhibition halls. The air smelled of fried food, hay, and diesel fuel. Children ran between the booths with cotton candy, teenagers clustered near the midway games, and families pushed strollers through the crowds. Luke wandered through it all, feeling like a ghost at a party, present but not quite part of things. He stopped to watch a pie-judging contest, bought a lemonade he didn't particularly want, and eventually found himself drifting toward the livestock auction barn. The structure was old, built in the 50s, with weathered wood siding and a tin roof that pinged in the heat. Inside, risers surrounded a central pen where animals were brought in one at a time for bidding. The crowd was a mix of ranchers, dealers, and curious fairgoers. Luke found a seat near the back and settled in to watch. The auctioneer was a man named Bobby Gilchrist, known throughout the county for his rapid-fire delivery and his ability to coax bids out of the most reluctant buyers. He worked the crowd with practiced charm, moving through dairy cows, a pair of good cutting horses, several head of breeding cattle, and a collection of chickens and rabbits that drew spirited bidding from families with children. The energy in the barn was lively, almost festive. Buyers called out numbers. Bobby's voice rolled over the crowd in that musical patter only auctioneers possess, and successful bidders collected their purchases with handshakes and paperwork. Luke found himself relaxing into the rhythm of it, reminded of auctions he'd attended with his father decades ago. Then the energy shifted. Two men wheeled in a rusted cage on a dolly, and the crowd's chatter died to murmurs. Inside the cage sat a German shepherd, so thin Luke could count every rib from where he sat 3 rows back. The dog's coat was matted and dull, patched with bare spots that might have been mange or old wounds. Its eyes were what struck Luke most dark and wary, holding an exhaustion that went beyond physical hunger. Bobby Gilchrist's voice lost some of its showman polish. "All right, folks, we've got a German shepherd here. Female, 4 or 5 years old. Best guess. She's had a rough time of it. That's plain to see, but she's got good bloodlines from what I can tell. Could be a fine working dog with some proper care. Let's start the bidding at $50. Silence. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few people looked away. $40 then, Bobby tried, his voice a little less certain. Come on, folks. That's nothing for a purebred. More silence. Someone coughed. A child asked his mother something in a whisper and was quietly shushed. Bobby's face reddened slightly. $25. Surely someone... Nothing. The dog sat motionless in the cage, as if she'd learned long ago that stillness was the safest response to anything. Luke watched Bobby exchange a look with one of the handlers, a quick, resigned glance that spoke volumes. They were going to take the dog away. To where? Luke could guess. The county shelter was already overcrowded, and a dog this damaged, this scared, this hard to place well, there weren't many options that ended well. Bobby raised his gavel, about to move on, when Luke felt himself standing. His hand went up before his mind fully registered what he was doing. "I'll bid," Luke said, his voice carrying across the barn in the sudden quiet. Every head turned. Bobby looked genuinely surprised. "You'll bid, sir? What's your offer?" Luke reached into his pocket and pulled out everything there, a rumpled 20, another 10, a 5, and a collection of bills and coins that totaled $8 more. He counted it twice to be sure. $43, Luke said. "It's what I've got." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Bobby's face softened into something like respect, maybe even gratitude. "Sold for $43 to the gentleman in the back. Sir, if you'll come down and settle up with Jerry at the desk." There was no applause. No one congratulated him. A few people gave him looks that ranged from pity to puzzlement. One older woman smiled sadly and shook her head. Luke didn't care. He made his way down. The risers to the desk paid his $43 and signed papers he barely read. The handlers wheeled the cage out to the loading area behind the barn. Luke followed, his heart beating harder than it had in months. When they set the cage down, he asked them to step back, Give him a moment. They obliged, walking a short distance away, but staying close enough to help if the dog turned aggressive. Luke knelt in the dust beside the cage and looked at the German Shepherd properly for the first time. Up close, the neglect was even more evident. Her coat wasn't just matted, it was embedded with burrs and bits of dried mud. Her paws showed signs of injury, pads cracked and rough. But her eyes, those dark, exhausted eyes, held something Luke recognized. It was the look of someone who'd survived, but wasn't sure surviving was worth it. "Hey, girl," Luke said softly, extending his hand toward the cage bars. "I know you've had it rough. I know you don't have any reason to trust people. But I'm not going to hurt you. That's a promise." The dog stared at him, unmoving. Luke stayed kneeling, his hand steady. "I've got a place. It's not much, just a cabin and some land. But there's room for you. There's food and water, and nobody's going to hit you or starve you or lock you up again. You can take all the time you need to figure that out." He didn't expect a response. Traumatized dogs didn't just suddenly trust because someone spoke kindly. Luke knew that. He was prepared to wait, to earn trust slowly over weeks or months. But then the German Shepherd shifted. She moved forward slowly, cautiously, until her nose nearly touched the cage bars. She sniffed Luke's extended hand once, twice. Then, with a deliberateness that felt almost ceremonial, she lifted her right paw and placed it against Luke's palm, the cage bars between them. Luke felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed tight since Margaret died, maybe even before that. The gesture of that paw against his hand felt like recognition, like two souls who'd been wandering alone suddenly finding each other in the dark. "All right then," Luke said, his voice rough. "Let's get you home." The handlers helped him load the cage into his truck bed, secured with ropes to keep it stable. Luke borrowed some old blankets from the auction barn to cushion the ride and drove home slower than he'd ever driven in his life, checking his rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure the dog was handling the journey. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Luke carried the cage inside, not heavy given how little the dog weighed, and set it in the corner of the main room, door still closed. He arranged bowls of water and kibble he'd picked up years ago when he'd briefly considered getting a dog, but never followed through. That first night, the German Shepherd didn't eat. She didn't drink. She just sat in the back corner of the cage, watching Luke with those wary eyes as he moved around the cabin, making dinner, washing dishes, trying to act normal while his heart raced with the magnitude of what he'd just done. He'd spent $43, literally every cent in his pocket, on a broken dog he didn't know how to fix. He had no experience with traumatized animals, no special knowledge, no grand plan. He was just a lonely cowboy who'd seen something of himself in a scared German Shepherd and couldn't walk away. As darkness fell and Luke settled into his chair with a cup of coffee, he started talking. Just soft words about nothing important, the weather, the cattle, a funny thing that happened at the ranch last week. The dog listened, ears occasionally twitching, but didn't move from her corner. "I'm going to call you Bristle," Luke said eventually. "You've got that tough, scrappy look about you, like a horse that's been through rough handling, but still has spirit underneath." "Bristle seems right." The dog Bristle didn't respond, but Luke thought maybe her eyes softened just a fraction. He didn't know it yet, sitting there in the lamplight of his small cabin, talking to a starving German Shepherd who wouldn't eat, but he'd just taken the first step on a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about healing, about second chances, and about the possibility of mending what seemed permanently broken. Sunday morning arrived with Bristle still in her cage, the food untouched, the water level unchanged. Luke had spent a restless night on the couch, waking every few hours to check on her, listening for sounds of distress that never came. When dawn finally broke, he knew he needed help beyond what he could provide. Dr. Sarah Chen ran the only veterinary clinic within 30 miles of Brewster Falls. She'd moved to town 5 years ago from Houston, drawn by the slower pace and the chance to work with ranch animals instead of endless appointments for pampered house pets. Luke had used her services for ranch emergencies, a horse with colic, a calf with pneumonia, and found her capable and direct in a way he appreciated. He called at 8 sharp when the clinic opened and explained the situation in brief, factual terms. Sarah told him to bring Bristle in immediately. The drive into town felt longer than it had the day before. Bristle stayed silent in her cage in the truck bed, and Luke found himself talking to her through the rear window at stop signs, saying nothing important, just keeping up a steady stream of words he hoped might be comforting. The clinic sat on the edge of town, a converted house with a gravel parking lot and a hand-painted sign. Sarah met them at the door, a woman in her early 40s with greying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the efficient movements of someone who'd handled thousands of frightened animals. "Bring her into exam room too," Sarah said after one look at the cage. "We'll take this slow." Together, they carried the cage inside and set it on the floor of the examination room. Sarah dimmed the overhead lights, leaving just the soft glow from a desk lamp. She pulled up a stool and sat at eye level with the cage, making no move to open it yet. "Tell me what you know," she said. Luke recounted the auction, the lack of bids, the $43. Sarah listened without interrupting, her eyes on Bristle the entire time. "And she hasn't eaten or drunk anything since yesterday? Not a drop, not a bite." Sarah nodded slowly. "All right, I'm going to open this cage now. Luke, I need you to step back by the door, give us space. If she bolts or gets aggressive, I don't want you in the path." Luke moved to where she indicated, his stomach tight with worry. Sarah opened the cage door and simply waited. She didn't reach in, didn't call to the dog, just sat there with the door open and her posture relaxed. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 minutes, Bristle slowly, carefully emerged. She stayed low to the ground, every muscle tense, ready to flee at the slightest threat. Sarah remained perfectly still, letting Bristle investigate the room at her own pace. The dog circled the examination table once, sniffed the air, then approached Sarah with extreme caution. "Good girl," Sarah murmured. "That's right. You're safe here." Bristle allowed Sarah to touch her, though her entire body trembled with the effort of staying still. Sarah's hands moved with practiced gentleness, feeling along Bristle's ribs, checking her legs, examining her paws and ears with minimal restraint. The examination took 20 minutes, and through it all, Bristle never snapped or growled, though Luke could see the fear in every line of her body. When Sarah finally stepped back, her expression was grim. "She's severely malnourished. I'd estimate she's lost at least 30% of her body. Wait! She's dehydrated, has intestinal parasites, and what looks like an old infection in her left ear. But that's not the worst of it." Sarah gestured for Luke to come closer, then carefully showed him Bristle's body. "See these scars? Old cigarette burns on her shoulders and haunches. This one here," she indicated, a patch of missing fur on Bristle's back left leg. "That's from a rope burn, probably from being tied up too tightly for too long. And feel here." She guided Luke's hand to Bristle's ribcage. He felt an irregularity under the fur and skin. Healed fractures, at least 3 ribs, poorly set. They would have been excruciatingly painful when they happened. And look at her teeth. Sarah gently opened Bristle's mouth. "See that? Worn down from chewing on something hard, probably cage bars. She's been trying to escape for a long time." Luke felt rage building in his chest, white-hot anger at whoever had done this. Sarah seemed to sense it, channel that into helping her heal, she said firmly. "That's what she needs now." Sarah returned to her computer and pulled up what looked like old records. "German shepherds, with this build, this bearing, she moves like a working dog, Luke. Watch how she positions herself near the door, how she's cataloguing every exit in this room. That's training. Professional training. You think she was a police dog? Or military? I'd bet money on it. Probably washed out of a program or got injured and was sold off or abandoned. It happens more than people want to admit. These dogs are bred and trained for high-stress work, and when they can't perform anymore, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to." Sarah spent the next 15 minutes going over a treatment plan. Special high-calorie food, introduced gradually to avoid refeeding syndrome, antibiotics for the ear infection, deworming medication, a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. She wrote it all down on a treatment sheet, then added a handwritten note at the bottom before handing it to Luke. He read her note. "This dog has been through hell, but still has fight left. The bill is going to be substantial," Sarah warned. "I can set up a payment plan if you need." "Bill me," Luke said. "Whatever it takes, I'll figure it out." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You know what you're taking on. This isn't just nursing a sick dog back to health. She's traumatized, Luke. That kind of damage doesn't heal with food and antibiotics. It takes time, consistency, patience, months, maybe years. And there's no guarantee she'll ever fully trust again." "I know," Luke said, though he wasn't sure he really did. "But I'm going to try." Sarah's expression softened. "Then here's my advice. Routine is everything. Feed her at the same time every day, same spot. Talk to her constantly. Let her learn your voice, your patterns. Don't force physical contact, but make yourself available. Let her come to you. And Luke," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "when she does start to trust you, it's going to feel like a miracle. Don't take it for granted. Dogs like this, they choose their person very carefully. If she chooses you, it's because she recognizes something worth trusting." They loaded Bristle back into her cage with food and medication. Sarah handed Luke a bag of the special kibble and detailed instructions. As Luke carried everything to his truck, Sarah called out from the clinic door, "Luke, bring her back in 2 weeks. And if you need anything before then, if she takes a turn or you have questions, you call me. Day or night, I appreciate that." "One more thing," Sarah said. "That photograph you carry in your wallet, the one of your son with his K9 partner, I saw it when you were paying. Bristle might just be the bridge you've been looking for." Luke felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Sarah said gently. "Think about it." The drive home gave Luke plenty of time to think. About Daniel and his years in the K9 unit, about the passion in his son's voice when he'd talk about working with Ranger, about the bond between handler and dog, about the distance between them now and the impossibility of crossing it. Could Sarah be right? Could this broken dog somehow help mend what was broken between him and his son? It seemed far-fetched, wishful thinking at best. But as Luke pulled up to the cabin and carried Bristle inside, as he set up her feeding station and her water bowl and made sure her cage had fresh bedding, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Small, fragile, probably foolish, but hope nonetheless. That evening, following Sarah's instructions to the letter, Luke prepared Bristle's first meal. Just a small amount of the high-calorie kibble softened with warm water. He set it near the cage and then retreated to his chair, giving her space. For an hour, nothing happened. Then, as the sun set and the cabin filled with long shadows, Bristle emerged from her cage. She approached the food bowl with extreme caution, sniffed it thoroughly, then took a single piece of kibble in her mouth. She didn't eat it right away. Instead, she carried it back to her cage, as if securing an escape route before committing to the meal. Only then did she eat that first piece, then venture out for another. It took her 30 minutes to finish what amounted to maybe a cup of food, but she finished it. And when she was done, she didn't retreat fully into her cage. Instead, she lay down just outside it, her head on her paws, watching Luke with those dark, wary eyes. "That's a start," Luke said softly. "That's a real good start, Bristle." In his pocket, folded and worn, the veterinary report detailed everything wrong with the dog in clinical terms. But Sarah's handwritten note told a different story, one about survival, about fight, about the possibility that broken things could be made whole again. Luke didn't know it yet, but that report and that note would become the proof he'd need later. Proof that transformation was possible. Proof that the most damaged souls sometimes held the strongest hearts. Proof that mercy, once offered, could ripple out in ways no one could predict. The first week with Bristle taught Luke more about patience than 57 years of living had managed to instill. Each morning began the same way. Luke would wake before dawn, make coffee, and sit in his chair talking softly to the dog while she watched from the safety of her cage. He'd tell her about the day's plans, about the weather, about memories that surfaced, unbidden stories about Margaret, about Daniel as a boy, about horses he'd known and places he'd worked. Bristle listened. That was her gift in those early days, the simple act of listening without judgment or interruption. She didn't care if Luke's stories wandered or repeated themselves. She didn't mind the long silences when grief caught his words in his throat. She just watched with those dark eyes, and gradually the wariness in them began to soften into something that might have been curiosity. On the third day, Bristle ate her breakfast while Luke was still in the room. On the fourth day, she drank from her water bowl without retreating to the cage afterward. On the fifth day, when Luke returned from work at the ranch, he found her lying in a patch of afternoon sunlight by the window, the first time she'd positioned herself somewhere other than near the cage or a wall. Progress came in these small moments, measured in inches rather than miles. Luke learned to read her signals, the subtle shifts in posture that indicated comfort or stress. Ears forward meant she was engaged. Tail tucked meant she needed space. A soft exhale, not quite a sigh but close, meant she was settling in for a nap. He bought her a collar on his next trip to town, soft leather, adjustable, with a brass tag he had engraved with her name and his phone number. The purchase felt presumptuous, like he was claiming ownership of a creature who'd suffered too much at human hands to belong to anyone. But when he showed it to Bristle, holding it out for her inspection, she sniffed it carefully and allowed him to fasten it around her neck. The collar became the first artifact of their shared life, a tangible symbol of the bond forming between them. Luke would sometimes catch himself looking at it as Bristle slept, the brass tag catching the light, and feel a swell of something he couldn't quite name. Responsibility, yes, but more than that. Purpose. Work at Miller's ranch continued as always. Luke would leave at dawn, spend 8 hours mending fences or moving cattle or fixing equipment, then drive home to Bristle. He started taking his lunch break at the cabin, a 20-minute drive each way that cut into his midday rest but felt necessary. He needed to maintain the routine, to let Bristle know he always came back. On those lunch visits, he'd find her waiting by the window. Not at the door that was still too vulnerable a position, but close enough to see the road, to watch for his truck. The first time he noticed this, Luke felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Someone was waiting for him. Someone cared whether he came home. He began bringing her small gifts. A sturdy rope toy from the feed store, though Bristle ignored it for days before tentatively picking it up one evening and carrying it to her sleeping spot. A better blanket for her cage, thick and soft. A second water bowl, so she'd always have one available, even if the first ran low. These offerings weren't bribes, exactly. They were more like communications, in a language Luke was learning to speak. Each gift said, "I see you. I'm thinking of you. You matter." The breakthrough came on day 9. Luke had settled into his evening routine, dinner made and eaten, dishes washed, coffee poured. He'd been reading an old Western novel, half paying attention to the story, while mostly watching Bristle doze by the window. Without thinking, he shifted his weight in the chair, and his boots scraped loudly against the floor. The noise startled Bristle awake. She jerked upright, eyes wide, body tense. For a moment, Luke saw the traumatized dog from the auction, all fear and defensive posture. But then, something changed. Bristle looked at Luke, seemed to recognize the situation as safe and consciously relaxed. Her shoulders dropped, her breathing steadied. She looked at him as if to say, "False alarm." Then she stood, stretched in that elegant way dogs have, and walked directly to Luke's chair. She didn't stop at a safe distance. She walked right up to him and placed her head on his knee. Luke froze. He barely breathed. Very slowly, moving with the kind of care you'd use handling something precious and fragile, he lowered his hand to rest on Bristle's head. Her fur was softer now after a week of good food and the medicated shampoo Sarah had prescribed. Under his palm, he could feel the warmth of her, the solid reality of her trust. They stayed like that for nearly an hour. Luke's hand on Bristle's head, her weight against his leg, both of them quiet in the lamplight. When Bristle finally moved away to return to her sleeping spot, Luke found his vision blurred with tears. That night, he took out the photograph of Daniel and Ranger and really looked at it, not with the usual mixture of regret and longing, but with fresh eyes. He saw the way Daniel's hand rested on Ranger's head, the same way Luke's had just rested on Bristle's. He saw the bond there, the partnership, the trust. Sarah had been right. This dog was a bridge. Not because she'd magically fix what was broken between father and son, but because she was teaching Luke how to be present, how to be patient, how to earn trust through consistent action rather than empty words. The question was whether Luke had the courage to take what he was learning with Bristle and apply it to the harder task of rebuilding his relationship with Daniel. He thought about calling, picked up his phone twice, and put it down again. What would he say? "Hey, son, I bought a traumatized German shepherd, and she's teaching me how to be a better person?" That would sound absurd. Daniel would think he'd lost his mind. But maybe, Luke thought, he didn't need grand gestures or perfectly crafted words. Maybe he just needed to do what he'd done with Bristle, show up consistently, be present, let his actions speak louder than his inadequate vocabulary ever could. He put the photograph back in his wallet, but left it facing out this time, so Daniel's face would be the first thing he saw when he opened it. Small steps. That's what Bristle was teaching him. Healing didn't happen in dramatic moments. It happened in the accumulation of small, consistent actions. A meal offered, a kind word spoken, a hand extended, trust, built piece by piece, day by day, with no shortcuts and no guarantees. As Luke turned off the lamp and settled into bed, Bristle made a sound from her spot by the window, a soft, contented exhale that might have been the beginning of a sigh. In the darkness, Luke smiled. "I hear you, girl," he whispered. "I hear you." Outside, the Texas night stretched vast and star-filled. Inside the small cabin, two damaged souls slept more peacefully than either had in years, bound together by the simple gift of presence and the slow, patient work of healing. By the end of the second week, Bristle had gained 8 pounds and moved with less hesitation through the cabin. The bald patches were filling in with new fur, and the infection in her ear had cleared. More importantly, she'd begun to reclaim behaviors that must have been trained out of her through abuse and neglect. Luke first noticed it on a Saturday morning when he was cooking breakfast. He'd left a dish towel on the counter and turned to the stove to flip eggs. When he looked back, the towel was on the floor, and Bristle was sitting beside it, staring at him with an intensity he hadn't seen before. Not aggressive, focused. She was waiting for something. "Did you knock that down?" Luke asked, confused. Bristle didn't move, just held that focused stare. Luke picked up the towel, and Bristle's tail waved once the first time he'd seen her tail move at all. He set the towel back on the counter as an experiment. Within seconds, Bristle had pulled it down again and resumed her sitting position, watching him expectantly. Understanding dawned slowly. "You're retrieving," Luke said aloud. "You want me to tell you good job?" He knelt down and praised her, running his hand along her neck. "Good girl, Bristle. That's real good work." The transformation was immediate. Bristle's entire body language changed, ears up, tail waving more freely, a brightness in her eyes that looked almost like joy. She'd been waiting, for work, for purpose, for the structure and praise that had once defined her life. From that morning on, Luke began incorporating small tasks into their daily routine. He'd drop his hat intentionally and ask Bristle to bring it. She did, carefully carrying the Stetson by the brim and placing it in his hands. He'd toss her rope toy and have her retrieve it. She never failed, never got distracted, approached each task with professional precision, but it was the more complex behaviors that truly revealed her past training. One afternoon, Luke was checking the fence line on the property near his cabin, not official ranch work, just maintenance on the perimeter of his rented land. Bristle had started accompanying him on these walks, staying close but not underfoot. Luke had been so focused on a section of loose wire that he didn't notice the rattlesnake coiled in the tall grass 3 feet to his left. Bristle did. She moved between Luke and the snake with a speed that took his breath away, positioned herself in a perfect defensive stance, and gave a single, sharp bark, a warning, clear and unmistakable. Luke froze. The rattlesnake, disturbed by Bristle's presence, slithered away into deeper grass. Bristle held her position until the threat was completely gone, then looked back at Luke as if to confirm he'd seen the danger and understood. "You just saved me from a snake bite," Luke said, his voice shaky. "That's K9 work, Bristle. That's professional." He pulled out his phone and took a photo. Bristle standing alert in the grass, ears forward, every inch the working dog she'd been trained to be. The photo wasn't particularly artistic, just a snapshot taken with trembling hands, but it captured something essential. Proof that beneath the trauma and fear lived a dog with extraordinary training and instincts. That photo became an artifact Luke would carry with him, stored in his phone's favorites, a reminder of Bristle's capabilities and her commitment to protecting him even when her own healing was still in progress. The incident with the snake changed things between them. Luke began to see Bristle not as a broken thing he was fixing, but as a partner with skills and intelligence that deserved respect. He started reading about K9 training, checking out books from the library about working dogs and their handlers. The more he learned, the more he recognized in Bristle's behavior. She was checking rooms before he entered them, scanning for threats. She positioned herself between Luke and strangers when they encountered people on walks into town. She woke at unusual sounds in the night, alert but not panicked, assessing each noise before deciding whether it warranted a response. These were learned behaviors, refined through countless hours of training and real-world application. Someone had invested serious time and resources into making Bristle an elite working dog. The fact that she'd been abandoned, abused, and auctioned off like unwanted livestock spoke to a cruelty that made Luke's blood boil. But it also made him think about Daniel again. His son had worked with canine seconds, understood their value, respected the bond between handler and dog. If Luke could get Bristle healthy enough, stable enough, maybe it would give them something to talk about. Common ground after years of silence. The thought scared him more than he wanted to admit. What if Daniel didn't care? What if 5 years of estrangement had killed whatever affection had once existed between them? What if Luke reached out and got nothing back? But then he'd look at Bristle, once starving and scared, now gaining confidence day by day, and think, if this dog can trust again, maybe I can find the courage to try. It was Sarah who finally pushed him toward action. Luke had brought Bristle in for her 2-week checkup, and the vet had been impressed by the progress. Bristle's weight was up, her coat was improving, and more importantly, her behavior indicated significant psychological healing. "She's bonded to you," Sarah said, watching Bristle lean against Luke's leg in the exam room. "That's not something traumatized dogs do lightly. You've done good work here, Luke." "She's done the work," Luke corrected. "I just showed up." "That's more than most people do," Sarah said. Then, more gently, "Have you thought about what I said? About your son?" Luke was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone and showed Sarah the photo of Bristle on alert after the snake incident. "She's got professional training, real K9 work. I keep thinking Daniel would appreciate knowing that, but I don't know how to start that conversation." Sarah looked at the photo, then at Luke. "Maybe you don't start with a conversation. Maybe you start with a photo. Send him this. Just say, 'Thought you'd appreciate seeing a fellow K9 officer at work.' Keep it simple. Let him respond or not. But at least you've reached out. And if he doesn't respond, then you've lost nothing. You're already not talking." But Luke, if there's one thing working with animals has taught me, it's that most conflicts aren't as insurmountable as they seem. They just need someone brave enough to take the first step. That evening, Luke sat in his chair with Bristle at his feet and his phone in his hand. He opened his messages, found Daniel's contact still there after 5 years, unchanged, and stared at the blank text field. His thumb hovered over the keyboard for 10 full minutes. He typed and deleted 3 different messages. Finally, he attached the photo of Bristle and wrote exactly what Sarah had suggested. "Thought you'd appreciate seeing a fellow K9 officer at work." He hit send before he could overthink it, then immediately regretted it. His heart raced, his hands felt clammy. Bristle, sensing his distress, nudged his hand with her nose, a gentle reminder to breathe, to stay present. "Well, girl," Luke said softly, "I guess we'll see what happens now." The phone stayed silent that night, and the next day, and the day after that. Luke checked it obsessively, telling himself he didn't care while caring more than he wanted to admit. Maybe Sarah had been wrong. Maybe some distances were too far to cross with a simple photo and a hopeful message. But on the 4th day, as Luke was finishing up work at the ranch, his phone buzzed. One message from Daniel. "Nice-looking shepherd. Working dog. 3 sentences. 12 words." But to Luke, reading them in the cab of his truck with his hands shaking, they felt like a lifeline thrown across a canyon. Luke stared at Daniel's message for a solid minute before trusting his hands enough to type a response. He kept it factual, safe, the way he'd learned to communicate during his years working ranches where too many words were seen as weakness. "German shepherd. Bought her at county auction. She's got professional training, probably police or military. Someone abandoned her." He hit send and waited, expecting another days-long silence. But Daniel replied within minutes. "What kind of condition was she in?" Luke took a breath and told the truth. "Bad. Starving. Abused. Scared. Vet says she's been through hell. But she's strong. Getting better every day." The 3 dots appeared, showing Daniel was typing. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally. "Takes a special person to take on a traumatized K9. They don't trust easy." "Neither do I," Luke typed before he could stop himself. He almost deleted it, but something made him hit send anyway. This time the pause was longer. Luke sat in his truck outside the ranch office, watching the sun drop toward the horizon, wondering if he'd said too much. But then his phone buzzed again. "How are you, Dad?" 2 words that carried the weight of 5 years. Luke felt his throat tighten. His fingers moved slowly over the keyboard. "I'm sober. 3 years now. I'm sorry I wasn't when it mattered." The response came quickly this time. "I'm glad you're sober. Really glad." They texted back and forth for another 20 minutes, careful exchanges about neutral topics. Daniel had left police work and was now training security dogs for private companies. He lived 2 hours north, in Austin. He was doing okay. Luke shared bits about the ranch, about Bristle's progress, about the quiet life he'd built. When the conversation wound down, Daniel sent one more message. "Can I see more photos of her?" Professional curiosity. Luke sent 3 more pictures over the next few days, each one accompanied by a short story about Bristle's behavior or recovery. Daniel responded to each one with observations about her training, questions about her responses to different situations, advice on working with traumatized canine seconds. The messages never strayed into personal territory, never addressed the 5 years of silence, but they were consistent, a new pattern forming. Meanwhile, Bristle continued to surprise Luke with her capabilities. She'd taken to accompanying him to work at the ranch, riding in the truck's passenger seat like she'd done it all her life. The first time Luke brought her to the main ranch house, Tom Miller, the owner, had raised an eyebrow but said nothing. By the end of that week, Tom was specifically asking when Luke and his dog would be working which sections. Bristle had a talent for finding things. Tools Luke had misplaced, a calf that had wandered from the herd, a fence post marker that had fallen into tall grass. She didn't need commands for most of it, she just seemed to understand what needed doing and did it. Other ranch hands started noticing too. Roberto, who'd worked at Miller's for 15 years, called Bristle the miracle dog and always saved scraps from his lunch to share with her. It was Roberto who first suggested Bristle might help with the theft problem. They were repairing a section of fence about 2 miles from the main house when Roberto brought it up. You know Tom's been losing equipment, right? Small stuff, mostly tools, spare parts, couple of saddles. Sheriff thinks it's someone who knows the property, taking things that won't be immediately missed. Luke had heard about the thefts, but hadn't paid much attention. Ranch theft was common enough, usually petty criminals looking for easy resells. What's that got to do with Bristle? Roberto watched the dogs systematically checking the perimeter of their work area, nose to the ground, alert to every sound. Dogs, like her. They can track. They can alert to intrusions. My cousin worked border patrol. Their canine seconds could follow a scent trail 3 days old. I'm just saying, maybe she'd notice things we miss. The idea took root in Luke's mind. That evening, he mentioned it to Sarah during a check-in call about Bristle's medication schedule. The vet was intrigued. It could be good for her, Sarah said thoughtfully. Give her purpose beyond just being a companion. Working dogs need work, it's in their DNA. But Luke, you need to be careful. If she's tracking or alerting, she could encounter dangerous situations. Are you prepared for that? I'm not trying to make her a security dog, Luke clarified. Just thought she might notice things. Alert us if something's off. Trust her instincts, Sarah advised, but also trust your own. If she's showing you something, pay attention. Luke started testing Bristle's tracking ability in small ways. He'd have Roberto hide a tool somewhere on the property, then bring Bristle to the area and see what she did. Every single time, she found it. Her nose would drop to the ground, she'd sweep back and forth in a methodical pattern, then zero in on the hidden object with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Tom Miller, hearing about these informal tests, asked Luke to bring Bristle by his office. The rancher was in his late 60s, weather-worn and direct, with 30 years of experience reading both land and people. Roberto tells me your dog's got a nose for finding things, Tom said, studying Bristle with interest. How do you feel about bringing her around the equipment shed? We had another saddle go missing last night. Sheriff's been out, but he's got no leads. Luke hesitated, but Bristle was already alert, picking up on Tom's serious tone. I can try, but Tom, she's still recovering. If she gets stressed, first sign of trouble, you pull back. Tom agreed. I'm not asking you to catch anybody, just curious what she might notice. The equipment shed sat a quarter-mile from the main house, a large metal structure that housed everything from fence posts to expensive tack. Tom led them there, unlocked the door, and stepped back to let Luke and Bristle approach first. Bristle's behavior changed immediately. Her ears went forward, her body lowered slightly, and she gave a soft whine, alert, without being alarmed. She entered the shed carefully, nose working, and made a circuit of the interior. When she reached the back corner where saddles were stored on racks, she sat down abruptly and looked at Luke. It was the same focused stare she'd given him when learning to retrieve a clear signal that she'd found something. Luke knelt beside her, studying the area. The saddles looked undisturbed. The floor was dusty but showed no obvious footprints. But Bristle was insistent, her nose pointing toward a small gap between 2 storage cabinets. Tom came over with a flashlight. Luke reached into the gap and felt something that didn't belong, a wadded piece of cloth. He pulled it out carefully. It was a rag, stained and dirty, but clearly placed there deliberately. Wrapped inside was a set of keys. Those are my spare keys, Tom said slowly. I keep them in the house. How the hell did they end up here? Luke looked at Bristle, who was watching him with that intense focus. Someone's been in your house, Tom. Someone who knows the property well enough to make copies before returning these. Tom's face darkened. Inside job, then? Has to be. Or someone with access who knows your routines. Luke stood, his hand on Bristle's head. Either way, your thief is careful. Probably been planning this for a while. They took the keys to the sheriff, a man named Jack Morrison, who'd been working county law enforcement for 20 years. Jack listened to the story, examined the keys and rag, then looked at Bristle with new respect. A K9 found this? She's got the training, Luke said. Just needed the chance to use it. Jack made notes, dusted the keys for prints, and told Tom he'd increase patrols around the ranch. But as he was leaving, he pulled Luke aside. "If your dog's as good as she seems, I might have some work for her," Jack said quietly. "Nothing official, our budget doesn't cover K9 units anymore. But we've got a few cases where a good nose could make a difference. Would you be interested?" Luke thought about Daniel's messages, about the slow rebuilding of trust between them. He thought about Bristle's focus in the equipment shed, the sense of purpose in her movements. He thought about doing work that mattered, that helped people, that gave both him and Bristle something beyond just getting through each day. "Let me think about it," Luke said. "I'll let you know." That evening, Luke sent Daniel a message. "Sheriff asked if Bristle and I want to help with some cases. Nothing official. What would you do?" The response came within the hour, longer than Daniel's usual brief replies. "If she's got the training and the temperament, she needs the work. But Dad, be careful. K9 work can put you in situations you're not prepared for. Make sure you know what you're getting into, and make sure she's ready. Some dogs can't come back from what was done to them." Luke read the message twice, hearing concern in the words "genuine care" from his son. For the first time in 5 years, he typed back, "Could use some advice on that, if you're willing." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Yeah, I'm willing. Call me this weekend?" Luke stared at those 3 sentences until they blurred. Then he typed simply, "Thank you." Outside, the stars were emerging one by one. Inside, Bristle slept peacefully by the window. And somewhere 2 hours north, Luke's son was holding a phone and maybe, just maybe, thinking about second chances. Saturday afternoon arrived, with Luke more nervous than he'd been in years. He'd cleaned the cabin twice, made fresh coffee, and checked his phone every 5 minutes to make sure the battery was charged. At exactly 2 o'clock, as they'd agreed via text, he called Daniel's number. His son answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad." "Daniel." Luke's voice came out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat. "Thanks for doing this." "Of course. So tell me about this dog of yours. Start from the beginning." For the next 20 minutes, Luke talked. He described the auction, the $43, Bristle's condition and slow recovery. He talked about her training, her instincts, the way she'd alerted to the snake and found the hidden keys. Daniel listened without interrupting, asking clarifying questions occasionally in a tone that was professional but not distant. "She's had high-level training," Daniel said when Luke finished. "The behaviors you're describing, systematic searching, alert postures, scent discrimination, those take months to develop. Someone invested serious resources in her. Any way to find out who? Could try reaching out to K9 training facilities in Texas. But Dad, most working dogs that end up abandoned, there's usually a reason. She might have washed out of a program, got injured, or had a handler who died or left service. The fact that she was abused after suggests she went through several bad owners." Luke felt anger rise again at the thought of what Bristle had endured. She deserves better than what she got. "She's got better now," Daniel said quietly. "That's what matters. So, this sheriff wants you to work cases." "What kind of cases?" He wasn't specific, said he'd start small, see how it goes. "Finding missing persons or evidence, I'd guess." There was a pause. When Daniel spoke again, his voice carried a weight of experience. "Let me tell you what I learned, working K9. The bond between handler and dog is everything. It's not just about training or commands. It's about trust, communication, reading each other's signals. Ranger and I, we could work a scene, and I'd know what he was telling me just by how he held his ears or the pace of his breathing. How do I build that with Bristle? Beyond what we've already got? Time and consistency, but also challenges. Working dogs need problems to solve. Start simple, hide objects for her to find, practice different alert signals, work in varied environments, build her confidence alongside her skills. And Dad, Daniel, paused. You need to train too. Learn to read her. Study K9 handling if you're serious about this. I've been reading books from the library. That's a start. But it's not enough. You need hands-on guidance. Another pause, longer this time. I could come down there, weekend after next, show you some basics, evaluate Bristle properly. If you want. Luke's heart hammered. You'd do that? She's a working dog who needs proper handling, and Daniel's voice caught slightly, you're my dad. So yeah, I'd do that. They talked logistics. Daniel would drive down Saturday morning, stay overnight, head back Sunday afternoon. Just a working visit, professional assessment. But underneath the practical details, Luke heard something else. His son's willingness to close the distance, literally and figuratively. After they hung up, Luke sat in his chair for a long time, processing the conversation. Bristle came over and placed her head on his knee, their established comfort. Gesture. Luke ran his hand over her soft fur. He's coming to meet you, Luke told her. 2 weeks. We've got to be ready. For the next 14 days, Luke threw himself into preparing. He set up training scenarios based on what he'd read and what Daniel had suggested. He'd hide objects around the property and have Bristle find them, gradually increasing difficulty. He practiced different alert signals, sit for found objects, bark for immediate threats, down for persons. Bristle learned quickly, her professional training surfacing more each day. Tom Miller gave Luke permission to use various parts of the ranch for training. Roberto helped by acting as a missing person for Bristle to track. Even Sarah got involved, providing veterinary guidance on keeping Bristle physically healthy during the increased activity. The whole town seemed to know about Luke's dog by now. People stopped him at the feed store to ask about her. Kids wanted to pet her, though Luke was careful about. That Bristle was still learning to trust, and children's unpredictable energy could be overwhelming. But she was gentler than expected with the young ones, patient when they approached slowly and respectfully. One afternoon, Luke got a call from Jack Morrison, the sheriff. A local woman's elderly mother had wandered from her care facility, early-stage dementia. Search teams had been out for 3 hours with no luck. Could Bristle help? Luke's first instinct was to say no. They weren't ready. But then he thought about Daniel's words. Working dogs need problems to solve, and an elderly woman lost in Texas heat time mattered. We'll try, Luke told Jack. They met at the care facility. Jack gave Luke a scarf belonging to the missing woman. Bristle sniffed it thoroughly. Then her entire demeanor changed. She was working now, focused and serious. She put her nose to the ground and started sweeping the parking lot, back and forth in that methodical pattern Luke had come to recognize. Within minutes, she'd picked up a trail. She led Luke east from the facility, toward an undeveloped lot filled with mesquite and scrub brush. Jack and 2 deputies followed at a distance, letting Bristle work. The sun was brutal, and Luke worried about pushing her too hard, but she showed no signs of stress, just determination. 20 minutes into the search, Bristle's pace quickened. She gave a soft bark, her alert for persons, and increased speed toward a cluster of trees. There, sitting in the shade, looking confused and frightened, was the missing woman. She was dehydrated and disoriented but unharmed. The EMTs loaded her into an ambulance while Jack pulled Luke aside. That dog just saved a life, Jack said simply. I don't know how to thank you. Thank her, Luke said, his hand on Bristle's head. She did the work. Jack took a photo with his phone. Luke and Bristle standing by his patrol car, Bristle alert and proud, Luke's hand resting on her neck. Mind, if I share this with the department, show them what a good K9 can do? Luke agreed, and by evening the photo was circulating through local law enforcement channels. It showed up on the Sheriff's Department Facebook page with a caption about civilian K9 assistance. Luke saved the image to his phone, another artifact of Bristle's transformation, proof of her worth. He sent it to Daniel with a simple message. First, search and rescue. She found her in 20 minutes. Daniel's response came quickly. That's professional-level work, Dad. I'm impressed. Can't wait to meet her. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of training, work, and anticipation. Luke found himself talking to Bristle about Daniel, telling her stories about his son as a boy, the time he'd rescued a stray cat, his patience with difficult horses, his natural empathy that had made him excellent at canine work. Bristle listened as always, but Luke noticed something new in her attention. She seemed to understand that someone important was coming, someone who mattered to Luke, and by extension, someone who would matter to her. The night before Daniel's visit, Luke cleaned the cabin one more time, made sure the refrigerator was stocked, and laid out his best guest towels. He felt like a kid preparing for something momentous, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Bristle sensed his anxiety and stayed close, her presence a steady reminder that healing was possible, that bridges could be built, that even the longest silences could be broken with courage and persistence. As Luke settled into bed, Bristle in her usual spot by the window, he whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow changes everything, girl. I hope we're ready." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human hopes and fears. But inside the small cabin, two souls who'd found each other against impossible odds slept peacefully, preparing for the arrival of someone who just might complete their unlikely family. Daniel arrived at 10 in the morning, driving a newer truck that looked clean and well-maintained, so different from Luke's ancient vehicle, held together by rust and habit. Luke watched from the cabin porch as his son parked and climbed out, and for a moment, neither of them moved. 5 years of silence stood between them like a physical barrier. Then Bristle, who'd been sitting at Luke's side, stood and walked down the porch steps toward Daniel, not aggressive, not fearful, curious. She approached with her head slightly lowered, sniffing, reading this newcomer with all her considerable perceptive abilities. Daniel knelt slowly, extending his hand. "Hey there, beautiful girl." Bristle sniffed his hand thoroughly, then something remarkable happened. Her tail began to wave, not the cautious single wag Luke occasionally saw, but a full, enthusiastic wagging. She moved closer to Daniel, pressing against his leg, making soft sounds in her throat that Luke had never heard before. Daniel's hands moved over Bristle's body with practiced efficiency, checking her build, her coat, her muscle tone. Then his hands stilled. He was touching something on Bristle's shoulder, beneath the fur. Luke saw his son's face change, confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like shock. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice strange, "come here." Luke walked down the steps, his stomach tight with sudden apprehension. Daniel guided his hand to a spot on Bristle's left shoulder blade. There, beneath the fur that had grown back over healed scars, Luke felt a small, hard bump, a microchip. "She's chipped," Daniel said. "We need to scan it." "I don't have a scanner." "I do. In my truck. I carry equipment from my training work." Daniel retrieved a handheld scanner and ran it over Bristle's shoulder. The device beeped and displayed a number. Daniel pulled out his phone and accessed a pet recovery database, entering the chip number with hands that shook slightly. The search took less than 30 seconds. When the result appeared on the screen, Daniel's face went pale. He stared at the phone for a long moment, then looked at Bristle with an expression Luke couldn't read. "What is it?" Luke asked, fear rising in his chest. Daniel turned the phone so Luke could see. The registration information showed a name, Officer Marcus Webb, Dallas Police Department. Registration date, 6 years ago. Dog name, Valkyrie. "I knew Marcus," Daniel said quietly. "He was in my K9 unit. Valkyrie was his partner, a German shepherd with exceptional tracking ability. They worked together for 3 years. Then Marcus was killed in the line of duty 4 years ago, shot during a robbery response." Luke felt the ground shift beneath him. "What happened to Valkyrie after he died?" "I don't know. She was supposed to be retired or reassigned." "But Dad," Daniel knelt again, looking Bristle Valkyrie in the eyes, "this changes everything. This dog isn't just any abandoned K9. She was partnered with a decorated officer. She would have been at the scene when Marcus died. She would have seen it happen." The implications crashed over Luke like a wave. All of Bristle's trauma, her fear, her wariness, it wasn't just abuse. It was grief and witness to violence and the loss of her partner. Dogs like Valkyrie bonded intensely with their handlers. Losing Marcus wouldn't have been like losing an owner. It would have been like losing a part of herself. How did she end up starved and abused at a county auction? Luke asked, anger and confusion warring in his voice. Daniel was already making calls, contacting the Dallas PD, pulling strings. Within an hour, they had answers, and those answers made Luke sick. After Marcus's death, Valkyrie had been assigned to his brother, who'd requested her as a memento of Marcus. The brother wasn't law enforcement, he was a civilian who'd claimed he wanted to honor Marcus's memory by caring for his K9 partner. The department, grieving and wanting to help Marcus's family, had approved the transfer. But Marcus's brother hadn't wanted a pet. He'd wanted a guard dog, a working animal he could use for a security business he was trying to start. When Valkyrie didn't perform the way he expected, when her grief and trauma made her difficult, when she didn't obey commands from someone who wasn't her true handler, he'd grown frustrated. The abuse had started slowly, then escalated. Eventually, he dumped her at a rural shelter 2 counties over, claiming she was vicious and untrainable. The shelter, overwhelmed and underfunded, had held her for the minimum required time, then sent her to auction. No one had wanted a problem dog, except Luke. Daniel was quiet for a long time after learning all this. Then he said, "I testified at Marcus's funeral. I stood there in my dress uniform and promised to honor his sacrifice, to remember his service. And all this time, his partner was being abused and abandoned, and I had no idea." The guilt in his son's voice broke something in Luke. "You didn't know. Nobody knew, except the people who should have protected her. I should have checked. I should have followed up." Daniel stopped, his hand on Valkyrie's head. The dog was leaning against him, offering comfort the way she'd learned to comfort Luke. "She deserves so much better than what happened to her." "She has better now," Luke said firmly. "She's got us." Daniel looked up at his father, and Luke saw tears in his son's eyes, the first time he'd seen Daniel cry since Margaret's funeral. "Dad, there's something else," Daniel said. "Ranger, my K9 partner, he and Valkyrie came from the same breeding program. They trained together. They were—" His voice broke slightly. "They were close. When I left the force, I couldn't take Ranger with me. Department policy. He was reassigned to another handler. I've thought about him every day since." Understanding dawned on Luke. "That's why you left the K9 unit, losing Ranger. Losing Ranger. Losing my faith in the system that was supposed to protect these dogs, losing my sense of purpose." Daniel wiped his eyes roughly. "After Marcus died and I saw how it destroyed his family, how it traumatized Valkyrie, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't risk leaving a dog behind if something happened to me. So I walked away." Father and son sat on the porch steps with Valkyrie between them, both men's hands on her fur. The Texas sun beat down on them, but none of them moved. "She found me," Luke said after a long silence. "Or maybe I found her. But Daniel, she found you too. Through me. That can't be coincidence." Daniel was quiet, then pulled something from his wallet, a photograph, worn at the edges. He handed it to Luke. It showed Daniel in uniform, younger and full of purpose, with his arm around a Belgian Malinois. But in the background, partially visible, was another dog, a German shepherd that looked remarkably like Valkyrie. "That was taken at a K9 training demonstration," Daniel said. 5 years ago. That's Valkyrie in the background. She and Ranger were demonstrating coordinated search techniques. I remember thinking she was magnificent, so focused, so intelligent. Marcus was so proud of her." Luke studied the photograph, this artifact that connected past to present, loss to recovery, separation to reunion. "I'm going to have copies made," he said. "One for you, one for me. We'll remember where she came from and what she survived." Daniel nodded, then looked at his father directly for the first time since arriving. "Thank you for buying her, for seeing her worth when nobody else did. For giving her a chance when," he paused, "when I didn't know she needed one." "I didn't do anything special," Luke said. "I just had $43 and couldn't walk away. That's everything, Dad. That's exactly what mattered." They sat together as the morning stretched toward afternoon, piecing together Valkyrie's story, filling in the gaps, understanding now that her journey had brought together three souls who all needed healing: a grieving widower, an estranged son, and a K9 who'd lost her partner and purpose. The twist wasn't just that Valkyrie had a past connected to Daniel's world. The twist was that all three of them had been lost in their own ways, and somehow, through $43 and a dusty auction barn and the mysteries of timing and fate, they'd found each other. As the sun moved overhead, Luke made sandwiches and they ate lunch on the porch. Valkyrie stayed close to both men, her body language relaxed in a way Luke had never seen before. She'd found not just one person to trust, but two. Not just safety, but family. "What do we call her now?" Luke asked. "Bristle or Valkyrie?" Daniel considered this. "She's earned a new name, fresh start. What about Val? Short for Valkyrie, but also short for valor, because that's what she's shown: courage to survive, to trust again, to keep going when everything had been taken from her." "Val," Luke tested the name. The dog's ears perked up. "I think she likes it." "Val it is then." They spent the rest of the day working with Val, with Daniel teaching Luke proper K9 handling techniques and Luke showing Daniel how far Val had come. Father and son moved around each other with careful respect, both aware that they were rebuilding something fragile and precious. As evening approached, Daniel said, "I'm supposed to leave tomorrow afternoon, but Dad, could I stay longer? Could we do this regularly? I could come down weekends, help with Val's training, work with you and the sheriff if he's serious about using her." Luke felt his chest tighten with gratitude. "I'd like that. I'd like that a lot." "Me too," Daniel said softly. Then, even more quietly, "I've missed you, Dad. I've missed you too, son." Val sat between them, her head swiveling back and forth, as if making sure both her people were okay. Then, apparently satisfied, she settled with a contented sigh. The sound of a dog who'd finally, after years of suffering, found her way home. Daniel stayed through Sunday, and by the time he left, he'd committed to returning every weekend for the foreseeable future. Father and son exchanged phone numbers they'd already had but never used, made plans, spoke carefully about the future in a way neither had dared before. Over the next month, a new rhythm established itself. Daniel would arrive Friday evening, stay through Sunday afternoon, working with Luke and Val on increasingly complex training scenarios. They practiced tracking, evidence detection, person searches. Daniel brought professional equipment, scent articles, training aids, proper harnesses, and leashes. Val transformed under Daniel's guidance. The professional training that had been buried under trauma began to resurface fully. She learned to differentiate between search commands, to alert Luke with specific signals for different finds, to work in various weather conditions and terrain types. More importantly, she learned to trust both men completely, to see them as her pack, her team. Tom Miller watched the progress with interest and offered more of the ranch for training purposes. Sheriff Jack Morrison started calling with small cases: a missing hunting dog, evidence searches at minor crime scenes, wellness checks where Val's nose might detect gas leaks or other dangers. Nothing too intense, but enough to keep Val sharp and Luke learning. It was Roberto who first noticed the pattern in the ranch thefts. They were sitting at the main house having coffee when he spread out a calendar on the table, marking dates when equipment had gone missing. "Look," Roberto said, pointing, "every Thursday night, for the past 3 months, like clockwork." Luke studied the calendar. Roberto was right. Every theft had occurred on a Thursday, always after dark, always when the ranch hands had gone. Home, and Tom was alone in the main house. "Someone knows the schedule," Luke said. "Knows when security is lightest. It's got to be someone who works here or used to," Roberto added. "Nobody else would know the property this well." Tom Miller, listening from his desk, frowned. "I've got 12 employees. Most have been with me for years. I'd trust them with my life." "Maybe it's not current staff," Daniel suggested. He'd driven down that Friday afternoon and was joining the discussion. Former employees? Someone who got fired or left on bad terms? Tom thought about it. Had to let a guy go 6 months back, Randy Hoskins. Caught him drunk on the job twice. He didn't take it well, made some threats about how I'd regret it. Luke and Daniel exchanged glances. Where's Hoskins now? Luke asked. Working construction in Brewster Falls, last I heard, living in that trailer park off Highway 67. Sheriff Morrison, called to consult, ran Randy Hoskins's information. The man had a record petty theft, drunk and disorderly, one assault charge that had been pleaded down. Nothing violent enough to raise major alarms, but a pattern of poor decisions and anger management issues. Not enough for a warrant, Jack said, but enough to make me interested. Problem is, we'd need proof he's the one hitting your ranch, Tom. Can't just arrest him on suspicion. What if we catch him in the act? Daniel said. All eyes turned to him. It's Thursday. If the pattern holds, he might hit tonight. We could stake out the property, have Val alert if someone enters. Luke felt his pulse quicken. That's using her for security work. That's different than what we've been doing. Not if we hang back, Daniel countered. Val alerts. We call the sheriff. He handles the arrest. We're just early warning system. Tom looked uncertain. I don't want anyone getting hurt over some stolen equipment. Which is why we do it smart, Jack said. Plain clothes surveillance, Luke and Daniel, with the dog at a distance. First sign of trouble, they back off. I'll have a deputy staged nearby, ready to respond. It took another hour of planning, but eventually they had a strategy. Tom would make a show of leaving the property around 8, his usual Thursday routine. Luke, Daniel and Val would position themselves in Tom's office with lights off, windows cracked to let Val scent the air. Jack Morrison would wait in an unmarked vehicle a quarter-mile down the road, radio ready. As darkness fell, Luke felt his nerves singing. This was different than finding lost people or hidden objects. This was confronting someone potentially dangerous, someone desperate enough to steal repeatedly despite the risks. Daniel seemed to sense his father's anxiety. Hey, we've trained for this. Val knows what she's doing, so do you. We're just observers tonight. Val, wearing a professional K9 harness Daniel had brought, sat alert between them. She knew they were working her entire bearing. Had shifted into that focused intensity Luke recognized. This wasn't the gentle companion who slept by his window. This was Officer Valkyrie, doing what she'd been bred and trained to do. 8 o'clock came and went. Then 9. Luke's back was cramping from sitting still, and he was starting to think the whole operation was a waste of time when Val's ears suddenly pricked forward. She made a sound, not quite a whine, not quite a growl, alert but controlled. Daniel put a hand on her back. Easy, girl. What do you got? Val's nose pointed toward the equipment shed, barely visible through the window in the darkness. Luke strained to see, but couldn't make out anything unusual. But Val was insistent, her body tense. Then Luke saw it, a brief flash of light from inside the shed. Someone with a flashlight, trying to stay hidden. Daniel was already on the radio to Jack. We've got movement in the equipment shed. Single individual. Can't confirm identity yet. Stay put. Jack's voice crackled back. I'm moving into position. Give me 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes felt eternal. Val remained on alert, tracking something they couldn't see. Luke's hand rested on her back, feeling her muscles coiled and ready. This was what she'd been trained for, to protect, to alert, to help good people catch bad ones. The figure emerged from the shed, carrying something bulky. Even in the darkness, Luke could make out a large duffel bag. The person moved quickly but carefully toward the property's back fence line, where a vehicle was probably waiting on the access road. Subject is moving toward the rear fence. Daniel reported quietly into the radio, carrying what looks like stolen goods. I see him, Jack responded, moving to intercept. What happened next unfolded with the swift efficiency of professionals at work. Jack's vehicle, lights suddenly blazing, blocked the access road. The thief, they could see now. It was indeed Randy Hoskins, dropped the duffel and ran back toward the property. But Deputy Carson was already there, cutting off that escape route. Hoskins, trapped, did something stupid. He reached into his jacket. Val exploded into action. She hadn't been given a command. Her training just took over. She barked once, sharp and commanding, and lunged toward the door. Luke, reacting on instinct, held her harness and went with her, Daniel right behind. They burst from the office to see Hoskins pulling out, not a gun, thank God, but a crowbar. He raised it defensively as Jack and the deputy closed in, clearly desperate and weighing his options. "Don't even think about it," Jack commanded, weapon drawn. "Put it down now." Hoskins' eyes darted around, looking for escape, and that's when he saw Val. The German shepherd stood between him and any path out, alert and focused, every inch the police K9 she'd once been. Her presence, professional, controlled, but unmistakably ready, seemed to drain the fight out of Hoskins. He dropped the crowbar and raised his hands. All right, I'm done." The arrest was anticlimactic after that, cuffs applied, rights read, duffel bags secured as evidence. Inside were 2 expensive saddles and various tools and equipment stolen from Tom's ranch over the past months. Hoskins confessed readily once in custody, claiming he'd just been trying to make back the money he felt he was owed after being fired unfairly. As Jack loaded Hoskins into his patrol car, he walked over to where Luke and Daniel stood with Val. That dog made the difference. He saw her and knew he was done. Professional-level work. Daniel knelt and removed Val's harness, the signal that work was over. Val immediately relaxed, her tail wagging, looking up at both men for approval. "Good girl," Luke said, his voice thick with emotion. "Real good girl, Val." Back at the cabin later that night, the 3 of them sat on the porch in the darkness. Tom had called twice to thank them. Jack had talked about making Luke and Val's partnership official, at least for certain types of cases. Daniel had been quiet, processing something. Finally, he spoke. "When Val charged that door, when she went into protection mode, I saw Marcus in her. I saw the dog he trained, the partner he trusted with his life. She's still that dog, Dad. All that trauma, all that abuse, it didn't break what's essential in her." "No," Luke agreed. "It didn't, and when you went with her, didn't hesitate, just held that harness and backed her up. That's what a handler does. That's the partnership." Daniel paused. "You've become her handler, Dad, really become it, not just the person who rescued her. Her actual partner." Luke thought about that, about the journey from a lonely cowboy with $43 to a K9 handler working with law enforcement. About Val's journey from auction cage to respected working dog. About Daniel's journey from estranged son back to family. "We all rescued each other," Luke said. "Finally. That's what happened here. None of us could have made it alone." Daniel reached over and squeezed his father's shoulder, the first physical contact between them since their reunion. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I don't think I've said that enough in my life, but I'm proud of who you've become." Luke felt tears sting his eyes but didn't hide them. "I'm proud of you too, son. Always have been." Val, lying between them with her head on her paws, made a contented sound. The artifact of tonight wouldn't be a physical object, it would be the memory of this moment, of 3 beings who'd been broken, finding wholeness together under a Texas sky full of stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sheriff Morrison wanted to discuss making Luke and Val's arrangement official. Tom was planning to recommend them to other ranchers. Daniel had already committed to coming down every weekend for the foreseeable future, to keep training with Val and rebuilding his relationship with Luke. But tonight they just sat together in the darkness, letting the quiet settle over them like a blessing. 3 souls who'd survived their individual hells and found, against all odds, something like grace. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the Hoskins arrest. Luke was repairing fence on the far side of Miller's ranch when his phone rang. Sheriff Jack Morrison, voice tight with urgency. "Luke, I need you and Val. Now. We've got a missing child." Luke's blood went cold. "How long?" 4 hours. 7-year-old boy named Connor Hayes. Wandered off from his grandmother's property during afternoon chores. We've got search teams out, but the area's huge, 1,200 acres backing up to state land. If he made it into the brush, Jack didn't need to finish. A child that young, alone in the Texas wilderness for 4 hours in afternoon heat, could be in serious danger. Dehydration, injury, wildlife, the sheer terror of being lost every minute mattered. I'm 20 minutes out. Daniel's in Austin, let me call him. Make it fast. I'm texting you the address now, Luke called Daniel as he raced toward the cabin. His son answered immediately, heard the situation, and made the decision in seconds. I'm leaving now. 2 hours to get there. Start without me, Val knows what she's doing. And so do you. At the cabin, Luke loaded Val into the truck with her working harness, water, first aid supplies. Val sensed the urgency, her entire demeanor shifting into work mode. They made the drive to the Hayes property in 18 minutes, Luke's truck pushing speeds it probably shouldn't. The scene was organized chaos. 3 sheriff's vehicles, volunteer fire department, at least 20 civilians spread out in a search line. Jack Morrison was coordinating from a command post set up near the main house, a property map spread across his vehicle's hood. An older woman, Connor's grandmother, Mrs. Hayes, stood nearby, face pale with fear and guilt. She kept telling anyone who would listen how she'd only looked away for a minute, how Connor had been right there playing with his toy trucks, how fast children could disappear. Jack briefed Luke quickly. Connor's autistic, non-verbal, doesn't respond to his name being called. Grandmother says he's fascinated by water creeks, ponds, anything. We've got teams checking all the water sources on the property, but there's a lot of ground to cover. Luke knelt beside Val, letting her see his face, making sure she understood this was serious. Ready to work, girl? Val's tail swept once. Ready. Mrs. Hayes brought them Connor's favorite stuffed animal, a worn blue elephant that reeked of little boy and love. Val sniffed it thoroughly, taking in the scent profile. Then Luke gave her the command, find. Val's nose went to the ground immediately, sweeping back and forth near the spot where Connor had last been seen. The other searchers stepped back, giving her space to work. Luke held the long lead Daniel had taught him to use, staying close but not interfering, letting Val follow the scent trail wherever it led. She picked up the track quickly, moving with purpose toward the eastern property line. The terrain was rough mesquite, prickly pear, rocky ground that would be treacherous for a small child. Luke followed, calling out updates to Jack via radio. We've got a trail heading east, toward Bear Creek. Val's confident. The search had been going in the wrong direction. Most teams had focused west, toward the road, assuming a child would naturally move toward familiar things, but Val wasn't guessing or assuming she was following Connor's actual path. 20 minutes into the track, Val's pace increased. Her tail was up, her whole body communicating excitement. She'd found something. They crested a small rise, and Luke saw it, a narrow, tree-lined creek about 3 feet wide, water moving sluggishly over a rocky bed. Val stopped at the creek's edge and looked back at Luke. But she didn't give her alert for finding a person. She was telling him something else. The trail continued across the water. Connor had crossed the creek. A 7-year-old boy, probably scared and disoriented, had waded through water and kept going into even rougher territory beyond. Luke radioed Jack with the update. We've crossed Bear Creek, continuing east. The boy went through the water, Val's sure of it. You're heading into state land now, Jack warned. That area's mostly unmapped. How's Val doing? Luke looked at his dog, who was already working the opposite bank, nose down, picking up the scent trail where it continued. She's strong. We're good to keep going. All right, I'm redirecting teams to follow your path. Luke, be careful. That territory gets rough fast. Luke understood what Jack wasn't saying. If Connor had made it this far, there were bigger dangers. Rattlesnakes, drop-offs, thick brush, where a small child could get tangled and hurt. The longer this went on, the worse the possibilities became. But Val was confident, pulling steadily forward, following a trail only she could detect. Luke trusted her completely now, the way Daniel had trusted Ranger, the way Marcus had trusted Valkyrie. This was what she'd been born to do, trained to do, what all the trauma and abuse hadn't been able to destroy. They moved deeper into the wilderness, leaving the search teams behind, following a trail that led toward either rescue or heartbreak. Luke sent up a silent prayer that they'd find Connor in time. Val led on, unwavering, racing against the fading daylight and a child's diminishing chances of survival. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold that would have been beautiful if Luke's heart wasn't hammering with urgency. They'd been tracking for 45 minutes now, moving through increasingly difficult terrain. Val never faltered, never hesitated, following. Connor's sent with single-minded determination. Luke's radio crackled. Daniel's voice came through. "Dad, I'm at the command post. Jack's briefing me now. How's Val holding up?" "She's incredible," Luke said, breathing hard from the exertion of keeping pace. "We're maybe a mile east of Bear Creek. Terrain's getting rough. Val's confident the boy came this way." "Trust her," Daniel said. "And Dad, trust yourself. You've trained for this." Those words steadied Luke more than his son probably knew. He focused on Val, on reading her body language the way Daniel had taught him. The slight change in her tail position, she was getting closer to the scent source, the increased pace, excitement building, the way her ears kept swiveling forward, she was homing in. Then Val stopped abruptly. Her head came up, nostrils flaring, and she gave a single sharp bark, her person alert. Luke's heart leaped. Val's alerting. "We've got him, or we're very close." "Thank God," Jack's voice came. "Through. Can you see him?" Luke scanned the area. They were in a small depression, surrounded by scrub brush and mesquite, with several large boulders creating shadowy spaces. At first, he saw nothing. Then Val moved toward one of the boulders, whining softly now, a sound Luke had never heard her make before. There, wedged into a narrow space between two rocks, was Connor Hayes. The boy was curled into a ball, his shirt torn, arms scratched from thorns, face dirty and streaked with tears. But his eyes were open, tracking Val's approach with something between fear and fascination. He was alive. "I've got him," Luke said into the radio, his voice breaking. "He's alive, conscious, looks scared but aware." The radio erupted with voices, Jack giving orders, someone calling for medical, Mrs. Hayes crying in the background. But Luke tuned it all out and focused on the terrified child in front of him. "Connor," he said softly, crouching down to make himself less imposing. "My name's Luke. I'm here to take you home to your grandma. You did real good, buddy. You stayed safe." Connor didn't respond non-verbal, Mrs. Hayes had said, but his eyes went from Luke to Val and back again. Val, reading the situation with her extraordinary intelligence, lay down on the ground, making herself non-threatening. She inched forward slowly until she was just within Connor's reach. The boy's hand emerged from his hiding spot, trembling, reaching toward Val. She held perfectly still as tiny fingers touched her fur. Then Connor's other hand came out, both hands now petting Val's head with the kind of wonder children have for dogs. "Val's friendly," Luke said gently. "She's the one who found you. She's really good at finding people. Your grandma's been so worried about you, Connor. Can we get you out of there so we can take you home?" Connor's attention stayed on Val, but he nodded, a small movement, but clear communication. Luke carefully reached into the space between the S-bodes. Rocks. Connor was wedged in tight, probably had crawled in there thinking it was safe, and then gotten stuck or too scared to come out. "I'm going to help you out now, okay?" Luke worked slowly, gently extracting the boy from his hiding place. Connor was dehydrated and exhausted, but he didn't seem to have any serious injuries. The moment he was free, he wrapped his arms around Val's neck and wouldn't let go. Luke picked up both child and dog. Val didn't protest, just let herself be held by this scared little boy who'd spent hours alone in the wilderness. Luke radioed their position and started the trek back toward the search teams, carrying Connor, who clung to Val like a lifeline. The reunion 20 minutes later was everything you'd hoped for. Mrs. Hayes, sobbing, gathering her grandson into her arms, thanking Luke and Val over and over through her tears. EMTs checking Connor and finding him remarkably okay, considering his ordeal, dehydrated, scratched up, traumatized, but alive and safe. Daniel arrived as they were loading Connor into the ambulance. He took one look at his father's face, exhausted, relieved, proud, and pulled him into a hug. A real hug, the kind they hadn't shared in 5 years. "You did it," Daniel said. "You and Val saved that boy's life." "She did the work," Luke said, his hand on Val's head. The dog was still on alert, still watching to make sure Connor was okay, even as the ambulance doors closed. Jack Morrison approached with something in his hand, a small toy truck, the kind a child might drop while running scared. "Found this along your track. Connor must have been carrying it when he got lost." Luke took the truck, turning it over in his hands. It was blue plastic, worn from play, covered in dirt now. Such a small thing, a child's toy, dropped in the wilderness. But to Connor, it had probably been important. A piece of home carried into the unknown. "I'll make sure he gets it back," Luke said, tucking the truck into his pocket. This artifact, he thought, would remind him forever of why the work mattered, why Val's training and recovery had been worth every difficult moment, why second chances were miracles worth fighting for. 3 months after finding Connor Hayes, Luke stood on his cabin porch, watching the sunrise and marveling at how different life looked from this same spot where he'd once watched it alone. Val sat beside him, no longer the starving, terrified dog from the auction, but a confident, purposeful K9 who split her time between being Luke's devoted companion and serving the community as a certified search and rescue dog. The certification had come through last month, making Luke and Val an official team in the county's emergency response network. Sheriff Morrison had pushed the paperwork through, citing Val's successful track record and Luke's dedication to proper training. They'd been called out twice since then, once for a missing elderly man who'd wandered from a care facility, once for evidence recovery at a burglary scene. Both cases had been successful, but more important than the official recognition was what had happened to Luke's life in the aftermath of Connor's rescue. The story had spread through the county, a cowboy who'd spent $43 on a dog nobody wanted, and that dog had saved a child's life. People stopped Luke in town now, wanted to hear about Val, asked if he was taking on apprentices in K9 handling. Tom Miller had given Luke a raise and flexible hours to accommodate search and rescue calls. Roberto and the other ranch hands treated Val like she was part of the crew, always making sure she had water and shade when she came to work with Luke. Even the local elementary school had invited them in for a presentation about working dogs and staying safe if you get lost. Connor Hayes had been there, non-verbal but beaming, and had spent the whole visit petting Val. Daniel's truck pulled up the drive right on schedule Friday. Evening. Like every Friday evening for the past 4 months, Luke's son had been true to his word, making the drive from Austin every weekend without fail. They'd established their own rhythm. Friday nights were for talking and catching up, Saturdays for training with Val, Sundays for rest and just being together before Daniel headed back. "Hey, Dad," Daniel called, climbing out of the truck. He looked good, healthier than when he'd first arrived, less burdened. Rebuilding their relationship had been healing for both of them. "Hey, yourself. How was the drive?" "Good. Uneventful." Daniel walked up the porch steps and greeted Val with the same ritual he always did, a thorough ear scratch and a, "Hey there, working girl." Val's tail wagged enthusiastically. She'd bonded with both men completely, understanding somehow that they were a package deal, her family. They settled into the cabin's main room with coffee and the comfortable silence that had replaced their years of estrangement. Luke had learned that rebuilding a relationship didn't require constant talking. Sometimes it just required showing up, being present, letting the quiet speak for itself. "Got something to show you," Daniel said eventually, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Inside was a certificate of completion from a dog training facility in Houston. I've been doing coursework, thinking about opening my own canine training center. Luke studied the certificate, then his son's face. That's what you want? It's what I've always wanted. I left police work because I couldn't handle losing another partner, but I never stopped wanting to work with dogs. And Dad, Daniel paused, watching you and Val, seeing what you've built, it reminded me that there are other ways to do this work. Training security dogs, search and rescue teams, therapy dogs, making sure working dogs get the partners they deserve and the care they need. That sounds right for you, Luke said. Where would you set up? Daniel met his father's eyes. I was thinking maybe somewhere around here, Brewster Falls area. There's demand for it. And, he hesitated, I'd like to be closer. To you, to what we're building. I'd like that too, son. They talked late into the night about Daniel's plans, about the future, about the business of healing and second chances. At some point, Daniel pulled out his old photograph, the one of him with Ranger, and set it on the table next to the photo Luke kept of Val, standing alert in the grass. 2 working dogs, Daniel said. 2 chances at getting it right. 1 family, Luke added. That's what matters. As the weekend progressed, they worked with Val on advanced tracking techniques, visited with Sheriff Morrison about upcoming training needs, and spent Sunday afternoon just sitting on the porch talking about Margaret, the first time they'd really talked about her since she died. They shared memories, cried some, laughed more, and honored the woman who would have loved seeing them together again. Sunday evening, as Daniel prepared to leave, he pulled something from his wallet, Marcus Webb's photograph, the one showing Daniel and Ranger with Valkyrie in the background. I made copies, he said, handing one to Luke. Thought you should have this. She's part of all our stories now. Luke took the photograph and placed it beside the others. He'd been collecting artifacts of transformation, of healing, of unlikely journeys that led to redemption. The $43 he'd spent that day at the auction had bought more than a dog. They'd bought him a second chance at being a father, a purpose beyond just surviving, and a partnership that had restored something he'd thought was lost forever. See you Friday? Daniel asked as he climbed into his truck. I'll be here, Luke promised. We'll be here. He watched his son's taillights disappear down the road, then looked down at Val, sitting beside him. The dog gazed up with those dark eyes that had once held only fear and wariness, but now showed trust, affection, and the contentment of a soul that had found its place. Just you and me for a few days, girl, Luke said. Think you can handle that? Val's tail wagged, and she leaned against his leg, their language, the communication they'd built through patience and presence, and the slow work of healing. Inside the cabin, Luke pinned the new photograph to the wall beside the others. Connor's toy truck sat on the mantel, returned to the boy, but then given back to Luke by Mrs. Hayes as a thank-you gift. The veterinary report with Sarah's handwritten note, "This dog has been through hell but still has fight left," was framed on his desk. These were the artifacts of a journey that had started with an auction and $43 and a moment of compassion that neither Luke nor Val could have known would save them both. They were proof that broken things could be mended, that abandoned souls could find family, that the courage to extend a hand across a cage could change everything. As darkness settled over the Texas landscape, Luke sat in his chair with Val at his feet and thought about all the ways a life could transform, about how sometimes the things we rescue end up rescuing us right back, about how second chances aren't just given, they're built through consistent action, through showing up day after day, through choosing connection over isolation and hope over despair. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more searches, more training, more opportunities to use the gifts Val possessed and the partnership they'd forged. Daniel would work toward his training center, and Luke would be there to support him, the way parents are supposed to support their children. But tonight, in the quiet of the cabin with his dog beside him and his son's promise to return lingering in the air like a benediction, Luke allowed himself something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of having nothing left to lose, which was what he'd felt before Val, but the peace of having found something worth holding on to, worth fighting for, worth building a future around. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Inside, a cowboy and his German shepherd, both rescued, both healing, both exactly where they were meant to be rested, in the comfortable silence of belonging. From forgotten to unforgettable, from broken to whole, from $43 to priceless, that was the journey, and it had only just begun.